Hello guys, welcome to Python and Machine Learning Daily. Today let's talk about chatbots. We released a new course, text-based course on Python ML Daily, Chat with Database. So there's a JavaScript widget which calls the internal database of cars and provides the answer in a human language with OpenAI API GPT-4. In that course, we built that solution step by step, including Python Chatbot API, then JavaScript widget, and calling OpenAI API along the way. In this video, I will kind of summarize that solution, partially reading that course to you. But if you want the full course, the text-based course that you can take at your own pace, it's free and the link will be in the description below, as well as the GitHub repository. That job is actually inspired by a real Upwork task. This one, you can see the screenshot. So the owner of that website needs a chatbot, and we came up with this solution. So here's an example of what we will build, and here's an example of our chatbot answer. So let's review how it all works. This is the plan of lessons, and let's begin with the first one. Job description is something like this. So user could ask the chatbot for specific models or types of cars, and then the AI, the chatbot, would answer the questions based on the database, the SQL database of the cars. And this is our plan of action. And it looks quite complex because, to be honest, it is complex. To provide that answer with the chatbot, there are multiple parts involved. So that widget, chatbox, is with JavaScript. User asks the question to Python API endpoint on the server. That Python endpoint accesses the local database. Database returns the structure of tables and columns. Then we call the OpenAI API to transform the user's question along with database tables to SQL from that tables. Then we run that MySQL query. Of course, we check that it's safe, that it doesn't drop the database or anything. Then we provide the result of that query to another prompt to OpenAI, which transforms it all into a human language response back to the user. So this is the overall plan. Now, step by step. Let's quickly talk about database schema. I wouldn't focus on that too much. We just came up with this simple but more or less realistic scenario because in the job description we didn't have the initial SQL. So this will be a table of cars with add-ons with some categories. And this is the SQL schema with some fake or semi-fake data that we came up with a few cars, and the GitHub repository will be available. This is how it looks in the database. So preparation step. Now, Python script. First, we decided to have the main Python script app.py and then separately have AI engine. These are the examples of expected answers to this question, for example. For this project, these libraries will be required. We need to connect to local MySQL database. We need to call OpenAI. Then we need to have Flask for the API. Then to deploy it all, we need .env, we need waitress and Flask course to have it as API endpoint on the server. As I mentioned before, we have app py and AI engine py, but for now we'll kind of fake the methods with static answers. So AI engine will have a method generate response, which for now returns the static data, and then the main app py just prints the generated response. This is kind of a preparation step, the schema, with hard-coded data for now. Then in AI engine, what steps do we need? To generate the response, we need to build the query, the SQL query from the question, and inside of that method, we need to have the methods of build the prompt to OpenAI, then actually call that and check the query if it is safe. This is actually my approach of building stuff step by step. So I create the files, the methods. For now, those methods return hard-coded data or some fake data, but at least I have the structure of what happens when. And then one by one, I fill in the methods with real code. So this is exactly our next step. In AI engine, we will focus on GPT prompt. Prompting in general is quite a huge topic in itself because correct and well-structured prompt is very important to get good results from GPT or any large language model, to be honest. For example, it's not enough to just query, give me the structure, give me the SQL query or something like that. You have to be pretty specific. So these are the basic instructions to ChatGPT, or in our case, we're calling that through OpenAI API. So we instruct what to do and what not to do, and then use the following format, and then we fill it in a bit later with guidelines. So these are static for now. Then context, and here we have variables. So here we'll have table structure, here we'll have question from the user, and we will fill that in step by step with Python. So this is our method build prompt. So we're building the prompt get table names from the database, and we will get to that in a minute. Then we loop through the tables and form that F string, huge F string with prompt, adding those as variables. And that get table names, a bit below, two functions, get table names, and we execute SQL query from information schema. And for that, we need to connect to the database. That's why we need that MySQL connector. Again, this video is kind of an overview, so I won't stop on coding pieces specifically. The link will be in the description below, so you can take it at your pace, and GitHub is also available. You can copy paste parts of the code and play around. So at this point, we have the prompt to the ChatGPT, to OpenAI API, and we can build that query. So we're calling the OpenAI API in this lesson. For that, we're using library OpenAI and call the syntax chat completions create. We're using GPT-4 in this case, and we're passing this as prompt. And the result of that should be SQL query. And then we need to check if that query is safe. Of course, there are multiple ways to do that, but we've chosen just the basic way of filtering out the dangerous words like insert, drop, and others. So we're basically allowing just select query. Of course, it should be also secured on the database level, so the user of running that SQL query should have only select permissions and not any modification permissions to the database. So now we have that AI engine, and we can call that from our main app.py. Of course, at first we will get an error about OpenAI, so you need to have your credentials in .env file. In our case, it is called OpenAI API key. And on the next run, we don't have an error, but we have that hard-coded result still. But we do have that SQL query returned. And if we change the original question, we have this SQL query generated by OpenAI API. Great. And then we can finish the AI engine by actually running that query. So we build the method getQueryResults from database. So another query to the MySQL database, execute, and we get the cars with this syntax with cars fetch all, and then provide the dictionary. Also some work on the environment with user and password for the database, and this is the actual text result. Now let's see what's happening under the hood in AI engine with a bit of debugging with print statements. What would be the result? First, we get the query, again generated by GPT. Then these are the results from the database in JSON format. Then we pass that again to ChatGPT, to OpenAI, with the prompt, with database columns, and with the results inserted. And then it returns us the text-based human language result. The final part of that AI engine is adding chat history, so the chatbot would remember the previous answer and, for example, would be able to answer a follow-up question. Again, there are multiple ways to do that, but we just use a local SQLite database to store that chat history with methods like retrieve history and write history. Every history has identifier, which will identify a specific chat. And to make it all work, we create the third file. So we have app.py and then aiengine.py, but we introduce the third layer, which is chatbot.py, or you could call it chat history or something. It will be kind of an intermediate bridge between those two. So we retrieve the history and return that history if that exists. Then we write that history, and then we call the same generate response, but including chat messages from history. So we pass the whole history of the conversation to the AI, to the GPT. So for example, we can hard code the identifier as 123, which is saved in the database, and then chat history becomes the part of the prompt. So we have our Python engine, and to make it work on any website, we need to serve that as API. For that, we will use Flask. With Python, the goal is to have that as API call, which would be made from a future JavaScript widget or from anywhere, to be honest. With Flask, there are a few steps to set that up. I will not stop too much here, you can read it all, but basically we're setting up the same .env and libraries just for deployment on some server. And in Flask application, we will have those py files. Our main app.py becomes a bit more kind of official with route of API chat with a lot of libraries additionally called to serve that as API, and then the main run or serve depending whether you're in a debug mode or not. And this is how we launch that as API, and then in Postman or whatever API client you can call API chat, which actually works and returns OK for now. And then we add the same functionality from the script that we had as Chatbot make AI request with identifier. We just add the API layer with JSON request and JSON response with these JSON request and JSONify. And this is how it works locally, testing API locally. We call the API with query and identifier, and we have the answer. Also errors if someone calls that with empty request or forgets the identifier, so a little bit of validation. Now, to deploy the API, of course, again, you can use multiple platforms. We will show just the DigitalOcean example, and here are the screenshots. So you create a new app, you provide the GitHub repository with the branch, you click next, choose the plan, where to store that, putting the environment variables like this. It's pretty convenient actually. The DigitalOcean platform is prepared really well for such projects. So you create the app, it is building, it can take a few minutes, but then it is ready for you to consume. And you have the URL of a real app, which you can call from your API client like Postman. So this is not localhost anymore. This is a real DigitalOcean application serving our Python API, which in turn calls the OpenAI API. And then the final part of this course, which I will not read in this video, but I will leave it to you and the link will be in the description below. It's about building the JavaScript widget. This channel is not about JavaScript, so I don't want to stop on that too much. So there are a few lessons, 4 lessons about JavaScript widget with NPM and Vite and JavaScript and CSS. You can read it all again at your pace, but what you need to understand is that there will be a URL that will be called just from JavaScript instead of API client. In one of those lessons, we'll have that widget ready. On the bottom right, we open that up and we ask our AI helper a question. So the actual final result is just adding the script to any website, which will have that widget in the bottom right corner. Finally, in this course, there's a different approach to ask the chatbot. If your database is really small, then it may make sense, again, be careful with that, but it may make sense to pass all the data to OpenAI API immediately and avoid running another SQL query and another prompt back and forth. So the whole schema is shorter then. We get all the database records without any filtering and pass it all to OpenAI API. And that's why I'm saying it's for smaller databases, because the context size will determine the cost of your API calls. But if you choose to do it this way, the code will be shorter. So make AI request, for example, call the OpenAI, and then in the database, we have a different method of transform the data, forming the actual data about cars as part of the prompt. And again, the link will be in the description below so you can browse around that code yourself. But basically, this is the prompt. Answer the question from the client based on these cars. So you load everything from database. The prompt is pretty huge. That's why it may cost more money to you. So yeah, that's it. Kind of an overview of the course. To create a chatbot, a JavaScript widget for any website, which would answer the question based on your internal database. What do you think about this approach? Would you do anything differently? Let's discuss in the comments below. And also kind of a warning and notice about chatbots in general. It's a pretty risky strategy at the moment. You can see sometimes online chatbots going wild with answering various inappropriate things sometimes. So be careful with your expectations and clients' expectations, because if you don't put very strict rules on what chatbot can and cannot do, your users may get really unexpected answers. At this point in 2024, at the time of shooting this video, GPT and LLM models are not 100% accurate with their answers, so you shouldn't expect wonders from them. Chatbot and similar tools should be kind of like helpers, but should not replace the actual help from human in addition to chatbot or instead of chatbot. This is kind of a simple human warning. If you want more demo projects like this one, subscribe to the channel. I will shoot more of them in the future, and see you guys in other videos.